This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
In the 90s, rollerblading was the fastest growing sport on planet Earth, completely dwarfing all of the other extreme sports of the time. At its peak, the sport had 29.1 million participants.
This kid has been skating as a pro since he was 9 years old. Oh! Wow!
Whereas around the same time, skateboarding had just 4.5 million and snowboarding 3.8 million. Rollerblading was everywhere. Films, televisions, competitions, it was massive. And then it completely died. The competitions disappeared, all the sponsorships had dried up, and these wealthy, famous rollerbladers were forced to quit and go get a job at their local Tesco's. In just 10 years, this thriving new sport had completely vanished. And in today's video, we're going to explore how the hell this all happened. Alright, so to set the scene, it's the 80s. The world as we know it is completely changing. Time's Man of the Year was awarded to a computer. The culture-defining MTV has just been launched. And amongst the big-haired neon tracksuits and overly synthesized music, the new craze of roller skating had started to gain some popularity. Between the 70s and the 80s, there was the invention of the roller disco, where basically you'd strap on some roller skates and listen to some music and have a little boogie, which I know sounds pretty lame, but it's good fun, especially if you got a few pints in you. You're golden. However, the roller skate was about to change. After two brothers and hockey enthusiasts, Scott and Brendan Olsen, came along. They were at their local sports store one day and they found a model of a rollerblade. It was slightly different. Rollerblades usually having wheels sort of adjacent to each other. This skate was just a straight line of wheels, now known as an inline skate. And they very quickly realised that this was the perfect thing for when ice hockey is out of season, as the wheels were straight, much like an ice skate.
Everything's the same except for the ice surface.
Scott and Brenny went home, and they descended into their dark, dingy basement. And in a sort of Dexter's Laboratory fashion, they didn't emerge until they came out with the perfect inline skate. This new skate was equipped with polyurethane rollers, a rubber heel stop, and it was perfect for maneuvering fast and quickly on any terrain. And there was one more thing that they had emerged from their dark dungeon with. A very simple but memorable business name: Rollerblade. In the early days of Rollerblade, the target audience was like skiers and ice skaters, to kind of give them something to do when it was off season. And it was pretty popular. Sales were good for this very niche market. And in 1986, the inline industry was valued at $7 million. But then disaster struck for the Olsen brothers. One of their mates, who was supposed to be their accountant, had started to fiddle with the money a little bit and embezzled $100,000, meaning that the company was in hot water and the Olsen brothers faced bankruptcy. But then a man by the name of Robert Naegeli swooped in to save the day. And by that, I mean he took them for an absolute ride. Originally, he offered them $1.5 million for just half the company. But then this guy absolutely shafted them. He got them down to $100,000 for 95% of the company. And over the years, as the Olsen brothers became more and more desperate for cash, they ended up selling for a 1% royalty of the company that would last 10 years. These new owners brought with them a brand new marketing strategy, and that was to turn it into a cool, hip and trendy fad. And so they decided to target the cool, hip and trendy place of California, being the same region that saw the birth of surfboarding and skateboarding. If there was any place on earth that would pay stupid money for the latest trend, it was California. And the plan paid off. Rollerblading swept California in the mid to late 80s. Pretty much everyone owned a pair of rollerblades, so much so that the term rollerblade basically became a generic name for inline skating. You see, something was missing. Rollerblading of the 80s was, to put it bluntly, extremely lame.
Rollerblades are created, not to imitated with these, homeboy. You're gonna skate greater. If you see me out there, you better be aware, cause I just might be coming from out of the air.
It was tied in with the image of like wealthy Californian yuppies, wearing neon-coloured spandex that was so tightly fitted you'd look like a piece of meat wrapped in cling film. Rollerblading was clean, happy-go-lucky, it was sanitized. It had absolutely no edge to it. It was about as edgy as the Teletubbies. And as an activity, it was mainly done in like a dancey fashion or just to cruise around with. But Rollerblade, the company, they didn't mind because they were selling rollerblades. But Rollerblade did put together like an official team, a bunch of personalities and talented rollerbladers to help push and promote rollerblade. There was this one guy called Bruce Jackson who was just an absolute head case.
Aggravated, you know when you gotta blow out some steam, just going inverted, like, BAM! Getting those huge airs and just having a blast, you know what I mean?
And the whole team were basically just caricatures of Californian lifestyle. Then rollerblading began to change. Instead of just cruising around and spinning in circles on flat grounds, rollerbladers started to incorporate ramps and jumps. And the rollerblade team would actually start to get better and do some kind of cool things. But then very quickly, the whole game would get completely flipped on its head. And that was due to the rise of a very similar sport, skateboarding. Before we go any further, I want to shout out Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Squarespace is the only platform you'll need to make a high quality, professional looking website. As someone who over the years has used many website builders, Squarespace just honestly trumps all of them. Squarespace offer a ton of features to make it super easy for your business to function. Whether that's like an email marketing campaign, or you want people to be able to book appointments on your website, or if you want to offer members only content, Squarespace has you covered. There's endless templates for you to choose from that you can just customize and tweak to fit your brand. You can save a load of money and hassle from having to work with web developers by just building your own website on Squarespace. So be sure to head over to squarespace.com/JimmyTheGiant. And to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain, use the code JimmyTheGiant. Anyway, back to the video. To give context, skateboarding had been around for a while. It was a massive fad in the 60s and then completely died in 1965. And the sport went completely underground. With no money in the sport, only the true OGs stuck with it. And the decline lasted all the way up until about the 80s, where we'd begin to see brands like Vans and Thrasher, who would basically pioneer this subculture, complete with the distinct fashion of like baggy jeans, skate shoes, and as well music, like the sort of skate punk genre that was very popular. But the cherry on the cake was the anti-establishment attitude. Skateboarding rebelled against the happy-go-lucky, clean image of the 80s. And as we entered the early 90s, skateboarding would completely blow up and become a sensation. With million-dollar brands, famous skaters, it was massive. This extreme sport that parents feared became the new rock and roll. And so if you can imagine all that hard work the skateboarders put in, the struggle to build the industry, being constantly told to get a job because skateboarding's for losers, and then rollerblading came along and said, cheers lads, we'll take it from here. The rollerblading community completely overtook skateboarding in a very short time.
Rollerbladers are the grunge aficionados of sports fashion.
By the mid to early 90s, there was 24 million participants that were rollerbladers. Compare that to skateboarding's measly 4.5 million. And so all of this led to a bit of a beef, but we'll go more into that later in the video. The early 90s for rollerblading saw not only the sport explode, but the skill level went nuts. Like in 10 years, people went from spinning around in circles wearing lycra shorts to launching themselves across like 20-foot gaps. In 1991, Chris Edward would become the first ever person to grind down a rail, which would completely open the floodgates to the skill of grinding. And again, much like skateboarding, there would be video parts that would come out. One of the early iconic ones was in 93 with Dare to Air, which in the beginning scene, they acknowledged the lame image of rollerblading that existed in the 80s.
It's for hardcore skaters, right? Like me. See, I'm the number. No, shut up.
And basically shunned it, saying that disco is out and that rollerblading was freaking hardcore, bruh. This video would showcase the lifestyle, attitudes, and skill of these young lads who are quickly becoming stars in the world of rollerblading. In 1993, the magazine Daily Bread was launched, becoming the voice of this style of rollerblading, which was now dubbed aggressive inline. And then it got even crazier. The participation numbers for inline skating went from 23.9 million in 1995 up to 29.1 million rollerbladers worldwide in 1997, making it the fastest growing sport on planet Earth. And the market was showing the effect of this insane rise in rollerblading. From being a $10 to $12 million market in 1988, up to $60 million in 1990, and by 91, it was now a $200 million industry, and then it would peak in 1994 at $650 million, with Rollerblade, the company, taking up a good majority share of the market size. Which, some good news for them Olsen brothers that I told you about at the beginning, their 1% actually made them about $10 million. But as for the culture of rollerblading, more and more video parts would be released, like these hour-long videos. Hoax 1 came out and it pushed Arlo Eisenberg and Brooke Howard-Smith into the spotlight. And it would be Hoax 2 that would really give an identity to rollerbladers. Arlo and Brooke went on to found the pretty infamous brand of Senate.
Obviously, the reason we have the name Senate is because we wanted a name that sounded powerful, but also that was corrupt.
Senna brought with it a kind of bad boy image to rollerblading, and very quickly became the face of the sport. In 1994, they started putting out t-shirts, and they made about 1.7k. Jump forward to 1996, and they sold 750,000 t-shirts, which made them about $13.5 million between 96 and 97. This was largely thanks to a massive marketing backlash.
Is causing all kinds of controversy tonight. They slipped in a slogan on their clothes that reads, "Destroy all girls."
So here's what all the excitement's about.
Senna clothing designer Arlo Eisenberg shows us where to find the slogan, "Destroy all girls."
And like overnight, every single news outlet across America picked up the story. Rollerblading now became the devil. It was countercultural, it was edgy. Gone were the days of the spandex-clad roller disco image. Now it was hardcore. And by that, I mean your parents hated it, which obviously made it really cool and you wanted to do it. But it was 1994, which was largely considered the year that rollerblading blew up. With record sales, it started to attract the mainstream market. Nike had their own rollerblade company called Bauer, and ESPN created the iconic X Games. The X Games was created in large part to capitalize off the success of rollerblading and all the other trendy extreme sports that were popular at the time. The success of extreme sports in the 90s I find very interesting, like skateboarding with Thrasher and Vans. Rollerblading had the same with Senna, Medium, Mind Game, all of these brands. They found an authentic way to like speak to the youth, which just saying that sentence makes me feel like a 50-year-old man. But it's true though, like the 90s advertisement was all corny, inauthentic, and just weird.
Totally fruity.
Man, I got a split.
Bruh.
And kids didn't resonate with it, but when they saw Arlo and Brooke, they could see themselves in these rollerbladers. They were just like them. So they wanted to represent Senna proudly, because Senna got who they were.
Art is its own justification. I don't care what anyone's rules are.
If it's the law, it's
That's what I'm telling you. If the law
Hear me
doesn't
out.
mean anything, if the law is bullshit, then I'm not going to adhere to it.
But with this coolness, now that makes me sound old. Every company and film wanted a piece of it. Pop culture became flooded with references to rollerblading. Films were made like Prayer for the Roller Boys, Airborne, the music video Bop even had rollerbladers. MTV, back when it was cool, they were constantly showing rollerbladers, like their lives, all the stunts they do.
What's up, I'm John Green from Warwick, Rhode Island. And this is my scar story.
And on top of that, X Games has become a worldwide phenomenon, pushing extreme sports to the forefront of culture. There was the two Yasutaku brothers who would just do mind-blowing stuff on the vert ramp, like double flips, big spins, big air, you name it.
You know, coming into this event, everyone thought that Eito was pretty much a sure thing 1080 California roll.
And the street skaters had gone nuts. Legends such as Eric Perkett, one of his most iconic moments was when he jumped down 2 sets of like 12 stairs. I mean, that boy must have traveled like 30 plus foot. There was Brian Aragon and the iconic Chris Haffey. Like, looking back at this footage, I seriously can't get over the skill level of these guys in the 90s. Like, I was sort of unaware about some of the things that they were doing. Because there was so much money in it, it incentivized rollerbladers to just push and push the level so that they might stand out and get a sponsorship. Rollerbladers were happy, investors were happy, but there was one group who weren't so happy, and that was skateboarders. Like, no joke, throughout the 90s, skateboarders hated rollerbladers' guts. Like, I mean, there were physical fights between the two. There was no end of insults, and effectively, skateboarding went to war with rollerblading.
Hello, I'm Johnny Knoxville, and this is Belt Sander Skates.
They would make these parody videos of rollerbladers. The skateboarding magazine Big Brother interviewed Arlo Eisenberg, basically just clowning on him the whole issue. And they even put like this Steve Irwin parody video out. And look, it definitely does sound very petty, especially now. There were a few gripes that skateboarders legitimately had against rollerbladers. Firstly, rollerbladers were kind of just seen as kids who'd get in the way at the skate park. They would take up space, they would put too much wax on the coping, and they were annoying. Secondly, they also called themselves skaters at that time. And lastly, and I think really what was the core of this beef, was that rollerblading never had to struggle for its success. These kids would just pop up and become rich, successful rollerbladers overnight, which was only really possible because of this like extreme sport industry that skateboarding helped develop, which took them like 20 odd years. Skateboarders had no end of insults for rollerbladers. But it didn't matter, right? At the end of the day, rollerblading was still going strong, wasn't it? Well, toward the end of the 90s, rollerbladers were at their all-time best. The skill level was nuts, more and more films made references to rollerblading. There was a rollerblading video game.
happy. You done good.
But despite that, things started to take a turn. And for the first time ever in 1997, the market started to falter. The secondary brands to rollerblade, which was K2 and First Team. K2 had experienced a 15% drop in sales, and First Team had experienced a 36% drop in sales. Nike fully jumped ship and sold their brand Bauer. People were trying to get out quick whilst the bubble looked like it was popping. By 2004, it was reported that the participation levels had fallen down to 17.3 million, which is a significant drop from the 29.1 at its peak. More and more companies were closing up shop, but then the axe fell on rollerblading's neck. In 2005, the X Games decided to pull any and all events featuring rollerblading. This was the final straw for rollerblading. With no X Games to show off their sponsors, all the sponsors pulled out. More and more of the magazines and the brands folded, and basically the arse end fell out of the sport. That was it. It was over. Pros were forced to quit and just find regular jobs. Kids were ditching the rollerblades for skateboards. The ride was up, and the sport just fell off of the face of the earth. Now you may be wondering, why did it die? Well, there's a couple of theories, ranging from 9/11 to masculinity, which seems to be every modern journalist's answer for all of life's problems. There was a whole documentary called Barely Dead, which I'd really recommend watching, which was made by rollerbladers talking about this subject. But the documentary kind of lost me when they started talking about this grand conspiracy, where all the skateboarding industries plotted to take down rollerblading. I'm just picturing Tony Hawk in a dimly lit poker table with a Cuban cigar, chuckling to himself how he's gonna destroy rollerblading. And like, yeah, whilst these theories are kind of wacky, they do pose some interesting ideas. There was this image put on rollerbladers to try and outcast them from like extreme sports.
One homophobic joke killed you. What's the hardest thing about rollerblading? Telling your parents that you're gay. That one little joke, the whole thing went away. I never understood it.
And this constant rallying against rollerblading would affect its image. It was seen as uncool, and it was cool to hate on it. But then some people present a more simple reason as to why it didn't last. That being that it was a pain in the ass to wear the rollerblades. You know, like say you wanted to buy a drink from a shop. You'd have to sit on the floor, unbuckle your rollerblades, pull your spare pair of shoes out your bag, put them on, tie the shoelaces, and by the time you're done, the shop's closed. And there probably is something to all of these theories as to why rollerblading died. But to me, I think it's much simpler than all of that. And that is that it was a fad. And to be honest, the more I've been making these videos looking into these different cultures, there's a very similar pattern that almost happens to all of them. When a sport's new, it has a great 10 years, does really well. Every company wants a piece of the pie, it gets more and more inflated, and then the times change, culture changes, the kids grow up, and brands like Senna just didn't appeal to people in like the early 2000s. They were on to the next thing. And the things that were cool in the 90s were seen as corny in the 2000s. Like if you go back to the early 2010s and you listen to the music from then, and the fashion, a lot of that it looks ridiculous now. And I think the reason it was so shocking was because it got so big. It came at the right time with the introduction of extreme sports. So when it crashed, it really crashed. And here we are now, 20 years on, 2021. And you know, that might not be necessarily a bad thing. Right now is actually an extremely interesting time for rollerblade. After the market was in downfall for the last 20 years, Rollerblade actually reported a 300% increase in sales. May of 2020 was the company's largest shipping of rollerblades in 20 years. And Google search trends mirror this growth. A lot of people speculate that this is in large part due to the lockdowns. And whilst that definitely did play a role, I think there's this general shift that's happening in society right now. People are getting nostalgic about the 90s. Like for instance, 90s fashion has been in style for a while now. And hit films of the 90s like Space Jam and The Matrix are now seeing remakes. Even in the music, like Machine Gun Kelly is like punk rock, as well Olivia Rodrigo. Who's to say that people aren't just getting a bit nostalgic and they want to slap on some rollerblades? And on top of that, skateboarding is no longer counterculture. It's very much culture. It's popular. If a kid wants to stand out and be different, rollerblading might be that. But making this video, the thing I was most happy to see, rollerbladers are still out there and they're still killing it. You've got the OG guys like Brian Aragon still kicking around, Chris Haffey doing stuff with Nitro Circus.
When I first saw a mega ramp, I was like, I have to get on that thing.
But then you've got the new gen, like Bobby Spazzo, Nils Janssen, Eugene Enin, who is particularly one of my favorites. He's got a very cool, unique style. From the UK, you've got Sam Crofts, who's out here like still sending big stuff.
Oi, what do you mean I got that? Oi, what?
From the parkour world, Daniel Ilabaka got involved with Rollerblade not that long ago, and he was sending some pretty meaty stuff. You've got brands out here still regularly putting out rollerblade videos that get decent views. And like I said in the slackline video, I do think they need more YouTube-y kind of content. If you take Braille, every time Braille makes a rollerblading video, they just pop off. Those videos work because they show the people who do rollerblading. It's not just insane stunts edited to music, but you're there with them. So personally, I do think rollerblading is about to have a second surge. Probably won't hit the heights of the 90s, but that ain't what it's all about. And I can't lie, making this video has made me want to buy some rollerblades. So let's see where it goes from here. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We've got new merch that's out on jimmythegiant.co.uk. You can support me there or donate to me on Patreon or using the sponsored link below. Peace. I'm just picturing Rollerblading? Tony Hawk.